So there's this whole new bunch of outdoor signs that are appearing now online. And also bumper stickers that, well, they appear on bumpers. Now, here are a couple of my favorites that I've seen recently in one place or another. One said, if you lived in your car, then you'd be home by now. There was also one urging us to honk loud if you like peace and quiet. There was one online in front of a church that said, you want a taste of religion? Then bite a minister. Not sure how I felt about that one. Then there was one on this website that was sort of philosophical. And it posed the following thought. It said, you do the hokey pokey and you turn yourself around, and that's what it's all about. So, what if the hokey pokey really is what it's all about? There were others as well, but I thought that maybe the best was the one that went back to the old Star Wars theme, and it simply said, boldly going nowhere. And I wonder if sometimes that isn't exactly the way that you and I feel, like we're boldly going nowhere. I ran across a quote that said, it's important to learn the vast difference between just moving and having real direction. It reminds us that just because we might feel like we're always on the go doesn't necessarily mean we're going anywhere that's worthwhile. And yeah, the difference between just moving and having a real direction is best defined by that single word, purpose. Years ago, I remember running into a cartoon in the New Yorker magazine. I've never forgot it. It showed a man running toward the end of this rainbow, only to find that at the rainbow's end, sure enough, there was a pot, but it was a pot of baked beans. Wow, what a metaphor that is for all of us who seem to spend our lives chasing that elusive pot of gold, only to discover that it's only a pot of beans. In other words, we boldly go somewhere only to discover that maybe it wasn't worth the trip after all. Robert Oppenheimer is a name that might be familiar to some of you. For a very young age, he was fascinated by science. Graduated from Harvard with honors in only 3 years. He then studied in some of the very best schools all over Europe and was quickly offered a professorship at Caltech. Considered to be the top of his game, the top of the list. Robert Oppenheimer was widely seen as being among the very best theoretical physicists in the whole world. And then something happened that changed his life forever. He was asked to head up a team of almost 5,000 people that was charged with developing the world's very first atomic bomb. 75 years ago, on this past Thursday, that bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, Japan. And 75 years ago today, a second bomb was dropped on the city of Nagasaki. Within weeks, these events would force the final end to World War II, with the Japanese unconditionally surrendering. Now, many would say that Robert Oppenheimer had reached the end of his rainbow. But was he delighted? Did he find elation in these accomplishments? Was he pleased, as most historians believe, that he really had hastened the end of the war with these awful weapons, saving hundreds of thousands of lives that otherwise would have been lost had the war continued? Did he find any fulfillment here? The reality is, no, none. What he discovered was that for him, the pot at the rainbow's end was filled with beans, not with gold. And when he saw the horrors of the weaponry that he had helped to create, he began to examine his values and where his intellect had led him. He resigned his position at the Los Alamos Project Center and spent most of the rest of his life trying to undo what he had done. And he knew the world would never again be the same because now the atomic genie was out of the bottle and humanity had the bomb. In something of a dramatic contrast, we also have the story of a woman named Dolores Hart. Now, back in the 1960s, Dolores Hart was a very hot commodity in Hollywood. She was beautiful, talented, in demand, as I say, a very hot commodity. If you're an Elvis Presley fan, you might recall that she was the person who starred opposite him in the movie King Creole. The bottom line is that she seemed to be destined for real success. But Dolores Hart upset everybody's expectations when, at the very height of her career, she left show business and became a nun. She said later on that she never regretted giving up the so-called glamorous life. In one interview, she said, I looked in the mirror one day and I realized that if my sense of worth, my sense of fulfillment was going to be based on my youth, on my looks, it was all going to be very short-lived. I sensed there was something more, much more. And I was right. Now stop and think about that for a minute. Here was a woman who had all of the things that so many of us believe are to be strived for. Things to be worshipped. She was young, beautiful, she was famous, talented. Already as a young woman, she was wealthy. But she also had this incredibly youthful wisdom to realize early on in her life that the elusive pot at the end of celebrity's rainbow was mostly a pot of beans, not gold. We all reach that point in life when we start to evaluate what it is that we're actually living for. Most of us reach that point, I think, gradually, over time, with experience. Some of us, though, reach that point of life evaluation suddenly, due to some kind of crisis or emergency, due to something that we never expected. So rather than a slowly evolving process, we kind of find ourselves rudely awakened. Now, the Apostle Paul would have understood that. His moment of self-evaluation was so sudden, so significant, that he changed his name from Saul to Paul to mark that moment. And as we know, Saul's story begins with a very comfortable position in life. Came from a prominent family, received the very best education available. He was a Pharisee, member of the ruling Jewish council in Jerusalem. He was highly respected among the other leaders of his city and his faith. Very sincere about keeping all the religious observances and ordinances. And then lately, he developed quite a reputation as a persecutor. A persecutor of the followers of this new heretical sect who called themselves Christians. So if anybody knew exactly who he was, it was Saul. If anybody knew exactly where he was going, it was Saul. Until he had this dramatic encounter with the risen Jesus Christ. And of course, his conversion on the road to Damascus is the stuff of legend. Only this was no legend. This really happened. And it changed him forever. Changed him to the point where he became the chief apostle for the Christian faith, rather than being its primary persecutor. And because of that transition, he now became the persecuted one. He now was the one threatened by those who used to be his friends. He now was hounded by those who used to be his colleagues. He now was the one who lost the respect of his family, lost his home and his job and his reputation because everybody felt he'd gone over to the other side. And his life was constantly placed in jeopardy wherever he went. So this morning, as we read through Paul's letter to the Philippians, that's where our scripture comes from, we need to remember that these words were written while Paul was in prison. Still, again. Yet despite all of his earthly losses, despite all of his worldly setbacks, Paul claimed to have found the one possession that was greater than all the others, and that was his faith. His faith in and his faith through Jesus Christ. That, to him, was the true gold at the rainbow's end. And all the rest, he says, is just rubbish, garbage, dregs, a pot of beans. A minister named Bob Moorhead wrote out his declaration of faith one day. This is some time ago. But here are some of the things that he had to say. He said, I am a part of the fellowship of the unashamed. I am a disciple of Jesus Christ. My past is redeemed. My present makes sense. My future is secure. I no longer need preeminence, prosperity, position, promotions, plaudits, or popularity. I am a disciple of Jesus Christ. I won't give up, shut up, let up, slow up until I have preached up, paid up, prayed up, stored up, and stayed up for the cause of Christ. I am a disciple of Jesus Christ, and I must go till he comes, give till I drop, and preach till all know. And when Jesus comes to get his own, he'll have no problem recognizing me. My colors will be clear because I am a disciple of Jesus Christ. Saul, who became Paul, would have understood every one of those words. So what about us? In the face of a statement like that, where are we? You know, one of the upsides of this COVID mess that we're all dealing with, one of the upsides is that it has given a lot of us kind of a forced hiatus right now. I mean, we have had to take a break, you and I, from the routines and the schedules of our lives. Yeah, this is all going to end, and maybe it's going to end a lot later than sooner. But this hiatus offers us the chance and the time to do some really thoughtful reflection that the busyness of life might have otherwise crowded out. Where are we going? What are we seeking? As our cover photo for today's worship asks, what is our heart's desire? And is it a worthwhile desire? Are we still chasing preeminence, prosperity, position, promotions, plaudits, and popularity? We still striving after the perks of life, or are we striving after life's purpose? You and I always need to be looking at the rainbows we're chasing. What are we really going to find in that pot at the end? We need to be constantly examining our goals and the paths we take to get there. What's really important to us? What are we willing to chase at any cost? And is it worth our lives? Is it worth the value of our living? It is said that Benjamin Franklin constantly evaluated his life, and he did this primarily by asking himself two questions every day. In the morning, he would ask himself, what good shall I do today? And at night, he would ask himself, what good have I done today? That's a terrific place for you and me to start, isn't it? So what is our heart's desire? What are we chasing and seeking? And in answering that question, perhaps we can avoid this endless chase of some rainbow where, more likely than not, the end result for us is going to be not a pot of gold, but one that's filled with beans. Amen, and thank you for being with us this day. May God continue to bless you for the rest of this week until we meet again in worship, although apart, together. Thank you.